Live from the Workplace Ninja Summit in Lucerne. Highlights, insights, and simply interesting talks. This is the Workplace Ninja Podcast.
And we're back on the Workplace Ninja Summit in Lucerne with a new recording, new people on the table, and new topics to cover. My name is Frans Oudendorp, and I have my co-host, Benno. Alex, you're still here.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on wherever you are in the world.
Yeah, and you're still awake?
Yeah, I'm trying my best. I mean, I had coffee, there's Red Bull on the venue. That's kind of nice. Yeah, staying alive.
Thanks for joining, and together we will ask some questions to the folks that are joining from Microsoft, especially from the security team. We have Paul Huijbregts and Hadar Feldman. Welcome. First, maybe a short introduction from your side, Paul. What are you doing at Microsoft? We known each other already for a long time, but you moved into the US and working for Microsoft in Seattle at the moment. So what are you doing?
I mean, this is essentially, you know me from, doing endpoint stuff, doing Windows stuff, doing endpoint security early on at Microsoft as well. And then eventually moving into kind of the product management space and kind of getting that opportunity to drive real improvement on customer endpoint security. And that's kind of where I'm still at right now. And I get to work with brilliant people like Hadar, build kind of out that Microsoft security ecosystem that allows us to defend customers wherever they are.
Yeah, and Hadar, you're from Israel, I guess?
Yes.
Working on security products for a long time, I guess. What is your role within Microsoft at the moment?
So I spent 15 years now in the cybersecurity space. I spent some of it as a security researcher. And I work for Microsoft almost 10 years now. Always amazes me to say that. And I focus mostly, I am part of the XDR and Sentinel team, meaning SIEM and XDR, and now those two coming together, which is really exciting. Building security solutions, working with brilliant people, enjoying it.
Yeah, and we have Paul working more like in the defense of endpoint environment. Hadar in XDR. How does that come together?
I think Hadar would probably be the best suited to, because she's the one putting it all together, right?
So I think it's interesting because we see in the XDR, we see all the different data we need to take into account in order to actually identify and protect from attacks, right? And it involves identity and it involves cloud and cloud applications. But still, the endpoint has such central place in protecting from attacks, right? Like we see everybody talking about cloud attacks, and we should, because these are growing and progressing and becoming more advanced, and we see more and more cloud-only type of attacks. But we should not forget that the endpoint still has central place in the threat landscape, and we still see that as a main component of protecting customers. And that makes me and Paul still work together, still need to innovate and actually be there to protect customers with the endpoint in mind.
For sure. And when I used to talk to customers about endpoint security, it was more like, oh, no, it's much more important to protect my network or protect my data. And, yes, the answer is yes. You need to protect everything, right? You need to be aware of everything. I always asked them, like, okay, so let's do the numbers game. How many servers do you have? How many users do you have? How many devices do you have? The numbers just, it tells you, okay, well, yes, I have a lot of users, so that makes sense to have a focal point, especially if those users, those identities are used everywhere. But if you look at devices, okay, how many endpoints do you have in your environment? And that's where they start realizing, okay, I might have a couple, thousand of those. What does it tell you about your attack surface? Like, what is the opportunity for something to go wrong? And so that's where you start to realize, it's where all of the data is used. It's where the users do their thing, hopefully in a secure way, but how do you know? I would say it's still very much a focal point of security today.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And just to add on the smart things Paul is saying, when we look from the threat landscape angle, right, and we see what's out there, we still see ransomware going on, taking organizations out of business, right? Yep. So we talk about ransomware for so long now, but that doesn't make it any less relevant to any of our customers, right? So when we look on ransomware and how they evolve and how they became more and more advanced, and how fast they manage to actually encrypt the whole ecosystem, the whole organization, we know that devices, endpoints, servers are critical to protect, because in the end of the day, sitting in front of a customer, well protected in every other state, but with his whole organization being encrypted, that's a very sad picture to look at.
Yeah. How do they evolve in regards to ransomware? What's the latest and greatest that you see attackers are doing?
It's a great question. I think the biggest challenge maybe in protecting ransomware, because we see ransomware evolve along the years, and we know they went a lot more hands-on keyboard, right? So they're finding their way, and they're no longer just count on, I'll just drop a malware and everything will be fine. They're finding the right focal points inside the network. Very often they find more than one, right? They find a couple of strong servers with a couple of power users where they can spread the ransomware from. So we see the hands-on keyboard, we see them operate a lot faster. And this is interesting because it has a lot of impact on protection. If you want to protect from ransomware, you have to operate fast. You have to do it at machine speed, actually, even though there's a hands-on keyboard person behind it. And one of the reasons, one of the interesting things that we see that they're like taking control of the entire state. They identify these focal points, and they wait, and then they do the encryption from all these focal points all at once.
Right.
And this is where speed is important, because often it's challenging to identify them just by spreading in the network, and not even to mention that, and to understand that they are about to encrypt. And then it just within minutes encrypt thousands of devices, and that keeps organizations, especially ones that do not adopt automation, very overwhelmed.
And I assume that's also one of the best arguments to talk about attack disruption.
Yes, my favorite
Which,
topic.
yeah, you were just coming from a session. I think we put you a little bit under stress today, coming from the keynote, having your own session about attack disrupt, and now podcast. But tell us, I mean, attack disrupt is, I think, something that many people have an idea of what it actually is and how important it's going to be and already is, but tell us what's the development in that area, and how does that help protect against ransomware in the future, for example, as one threat?
Yeah, so I could spend hours talking about attack disruption.
Well, we have a few.
I bet.
So I'm going to try to give the tip of the iceberg on the work Paul and his team and myself and my team are doing together in order to make that happen. And eventually attack disruption is really looking on like protecting more than anything at machine speed, but it's not just yet another like protection playbook, if you will, right? It leverages generative AI, and more important, it looks on all the XDR signals. And I want to go back to our point on saying how important endpoints are, right? But even there, even if we look on a very endpoint classic attack like ransomware, right, we still see heavy lift on the involved identities, right? Identities being leveraged in order to spread the ransomware, to spread the malware. And so the importance of XDR being able to look on the entire data, actually it's even more than XDR, the importance of Sentinel looking beyond only the XDR stack, but on basically any data out there. In order to be able to gain the right confidence, understand, analyze at machine speed that there's a real attack going on, again, 99% confidence, and then take action. But even there, taking action is not flattering disruption enough, because disruption is doing, after understanding there's an attack, there is doing what we call coordinate defense, meaning take all the actions we can take across the stack, whether if it's on the identity and on the endpoint, in order to make sure that we disrupt the attack way before there's a large business impact, meaning before devices are being encrypted. And this is really the magic of disruption, and we actually see cases out there protecting 97% of the organization from being encrypted. If you ask yourself why I'm saying 97% and not 100, it's because the other three were protected by another vendor that were fully encrypted. So we're very proud of the capabilities of attack disruption.
Let's double click on the development, because I really imagine you guys sitting in a room, all these smart engineering folks, and debating on whether not to interrupt within an incident, because I know that it's available, the feature is available for some use cases, so I assume that there is some improvement work that needs to be done on others. How is that conversation going? How is how do you get to the confidence to say, yes, now we're good. Now we can decide that we're interrupting a software from doing whatever it does in absolutely maybe the frame of ransomware. So how is that development done?
So that's a great question, because I think confidence in automation is one of the most challenging topics, right? When I automate on something, I need to convince that I'm doing the right thing, right? People tend to be scared of automation, like, don't take action on my environment. But if you sit there and wait to take action yourself, you're most likely to be fully encrypted. And first I want to say, you mentioned like all the smart engineers. We have top of the line research group, a very big research group that is the driver of attack disruption, right? Because they eventually are the people knowing the threat landscape, understand the attacks to the bits and bytes of how exactly they operate, and also understand the level of unknowns that we sometimes may have, right? We don't necessarily know to identify each and every technique if it was just first seen out there in the world. And this is the importance of combining researchers with our known TI, known techniques out there, and generative AI that can help us anticipate suspicious behaviors just as anomaly from what we knew so far. And so the process behind it is really looking at the threat landscape, looking on the attacks that are the most impactful and disruptive to the business of our customers, and try to understand how across the kill chain of this attack we can identify the attack, gain enough confidence that there is an actual attack out there, identify the assets compromised by the attacker and being leveraged by the attacker to actually spread this attack, and then decide on which actions we should take in order to actually disrupt the attack effectively. And effectively is a key word here, because you may take action, but the attack can still proceed, right? And that's a very exhaustive work process in which we identify the right scenarios, we build the right detections, the right correlations, coordinate response. We through that involve that with our TI and with our generative AI capabilities in order to gain the right confidence. And then we only release it in silent mode to make sure that we are not doing anything wrong with our customer base, right? We take very responsible actions when it comes to attack disruption. We analyze every case we see out there to make sure that if we would disrupt, that would be the right thing to do. And only then, after building all that, gaining the right confidence, make sure we're doing the right thing, we're actually releasing it to disrupt attacks.
Is there any...
Yeah, I'll chime in from just from let's say endpoint point of view. I think it really helps for customers to understand what is it that we would do in a given situation. And so we try to educate on, okay, well, this is an attack disruption scenario, what can happen, and we have various use cases, and they get more and more elaborate as you kind of go across the XDR, across Sentinel, you gain more and more confidence and signal. But just to give an example from Endpoint alone, what you need to know is that we're obviously not in business of bringing systems down, right? So whatever remediation we do needs to be appropriate as a response. And so what are some of the common factors that we can focus on when we do that? Like all of the signals, and the researchers try to find a high confidence signal.
Correct.
What are they looking for? And then because they have that signal, now they know exactly where to act and how to act. And that's the part where the disruption comes in and says, okay, you know what? This attacker that we profiled is clearly moving from A to B to C. It's lateral movement. It's concept been around forever. I mean, everybody understands what that means. But if you also know that that's the only path to get where they need to be, then you can disrupt the path. And this is why we also have a lot of emphasis on our posture products around attack paths, and because lateral movement is essentially how any of these attacks eventually end up where they need to be. And this is done by very, very specialized teams. Like, these are different organizations that specialize in each part of the execution of an end-to-end ransomware attack. That's why they're so sophisticated. Yet still, there are common factors. Like, there's a user involved. There's always an identity involved. If you want to get from A to B, there's always hosts involved, there's always devices involved. And so once you start realizing like that is the path an attack can take, and those are the opportunities for us to interact, let's kill the user session, let's block the connection, let's contain the device, because we know there's this unmanaged device, some bad stuff is coming from there. Now, let's make sure that all the other machines do not accept connections. And there's a very surgical way of doing it, because the last thing we want to do is for an attack to become an automatic denial of service on the
100%. That's super interesting.
Yeah.
And I assume somebody high up in the management has seen how brilliant you work on the challenges in endpoint management, Paul, and also the challenges that organizations face with the sensor, or generally speaking, putting the agent on different machines and maybe closing the blind spots. Can you tell us a little bit about what in particular you are working on right now with the team when it comes to the challenges that they face with the blind spots and general performance even?
Right. There's a lot we're working on, and it's kind of across the board when you start to realize, like Hadar just confirmed, hey, endpoint's kind of important. Equally important is that our stack actually is up and running and is healthy on these endpoints, right? Otherwise, we cannot provide all of this great security value. We can't do the disruption. We can't give you the posture assessments. We can't give somebody attack paths. We might have an ability to do so from other products, sure, but right, that's kind of the example there, is that we really have a vested interest that our stuff stays safe, stays secure, doesn't get tampered with. It runs well, so you don't have performance issues. It's manageable in an enterprise environment, and you can reliably observe that it's operating as intended. And so all of these aspects are kind of equally important. Where it kind of hits that management space where we place our trust in our customers to operate our product in the way that we hope they are. But at the same time, there's complexity involved in any environment. Like, there's such a big variance in environments. And if every customer observed operational excellence, if they were capable of, in a highly complex environment, keeping all machines up to date, do the right thing, do all the patching, have complete control, complete visibility of all of their assets, we would probably have less work to do. But it's in that chaos, in the fact that there is such a diversity out there in systems, and it's not just Windows, it's all across the landscape, right? And that's where we just have to acknowledge, like, nobody gets it perfect. Definitely nobody gets it perfect all the time. So how can we help? What can we do to make sure that customers simply have an easier time? So if they click MDE, they're getting MDE across the board. It's easy to get on board on any system, no matter how old it is or what patch level it's running at the time or how it's configured before MDE even gets lit up on the box. These are some very important considerations. So when you talk about how do we enable customers to be secure, I think at the endpoint level, and we have a fantastic opportunity there, and to keep doing that, especially, we are also the operating system vendor for Windows, right? So we get to talk to these people. We understand what things we should do and shouldn't do, and we negotiate, we talk about them. We observe our own release processes that are in line with what Windows does, are in line with industry standards, and make sure, hey, this stuff is so important, we need to get it right. And
Frans, did you hear that? He said, no matter how old that system is.
That was one of the things that takes my attention.
Thanks for the little gotcha there. Well, there's only so much you can do, but just acknowledging the fact that there's such great diversity out there that we need to take care of. And, it's always like, what is the weakest link that gets exploited next? Is it the user? Is it a legacy system? Is it an unmanaged system? It all goes to, do we even have the capability of providing you with the right security technology? That's a fundamental need. And so we acknowledge, like, hey, we can definitely do better there. I'd love to be able to give you the view of your environment and say, hey, these devices are unmanaged, not onboarded, and I want to reliably do so. Guess what? I'm going to have at least some machines in your environment that can look around them in such a way. And so I do see that our role is mostly the enablement platform for further Microsoft security.
Yeah. Paul, you had a session we are at an event where mainly sysadmins, workplace guys, girls are on. What are the actual topics that workplace engineers are facing regarding our security products?
Yeah, and I mean, this is where, essentially what I just said, if you take that larger theme of how do we enable people to be successful with our product, because we want to deliver that security value reliably, consistently all the time, we are not in complete control of any environment, and that will never be the case. And so we are dependent on our customers being able to get our product working inside of their unique environment. This is where, for this particular event, I was like, okay, so what is current? What is the right message here? What are these workplace specialists interested in when it comes to that? Because we have a common goal, because their customers are asking them, hey, can you roll out MDE for me? So I really focused on what are the preconditions in a specific environment? What are some of the common things that you always encounter in customer environment that you should know about and how to handle? Because once you know it, it's easy. And that's very often the case, right? We focused on networking basics. What do you need to know about different endpoint? How do you make sure that connectivity is reliably present? What are some of the things that can go wrong? Let's focus on that first, right? Without connectivity, how are you going to use a cloud service like Defender?
Yep.
To a point you can, but it's still not going to give you the full experience. So that's one precondition. And then the second part, well, there's more parts to it, but the second part that I really focused on this time was, how do you make sure that you continuously receive the security value in a safe and reliable way without causing disruption in the environment?
Yep.
And so this is where we have spent a lot of time making sure that what we're putting out there is of the highest quality. And if it's not, we actually stop it. Like, this is why we are not consistently delivering new versions of the product every month.
No.
Simply because we acknowledge quality is of the utmost important. And so we skip releases if we don't feel it's good enough, or we postpone them, or we redo them, and so on and so forth, right?
Yep.
That's a very important aspect to know. We keep an eye on things. And then finally, we also want to empower our customers to have the right level of control that is relevant for their environment, for their risk appetite. Because at the end of the day, I'm a little bit more abstract, but if you look at how security is described, a common security practice, or one word that an acronym that people remember is CIA, which is confidentiality, integrity, and availability. The availability piece is just as important as the other two. And so that, to me, that means I should make sure my systems remain up. As part of a good security practice, as part of operational excellence, as a customer, if certain machines go down in my environment, my business is down. And so there is a level of control that you can exert over your own environment as a customer, where you say, all right, well, but these are my critical assets. Yes, I want to secure them. Yes, I want to make sure the latest and greatest security is available on those machines. But no, I don't have any appetite for disruption. So then you need to realize, like, okay, well, the bulk of your machines, you can let updates flow regularly so you can receive that up-to-date security. These machines are also in a risk profile that is more exposed to the outside world, whereas, at your business critical or mission critical end, these are machines that need to be tightly controlled. You're in control. You put mitigating factors around that, because then you can control the change, and then you can accept some of the risk of not receiving the latest and greatest straight away. Yet still, with MDE, we provide the deep visibility that you still need, right? So it's kind of this, we can't predict upfront, well, you might with all of the AI stuff, but we can't predict upfront what the critical assets are unless there's some identifying factor. If your critical assets are machines that are running in an isolated segment, running some proprietary software that we don't really know what it is, we can guess at it, then you're going to have to provide that additional context and those additional controls. And so that's kind of where the session was also about. It's like, hey, these are all the controls that we offer you. You should use them.
Yeah.
But to take away the burden of doing that, focus on automating most of it, where the risk appetite for change is a little bit, higher. Like it's okay if something goes wrong every once in a while, versus the tightly controlled space where it's not enough to just have these controls. You probably want some sort of manual process around it to make sure that something doesn't go down. And like final message there is make sure you also think about that availability, not just from, hey, stuff is flowing, but are you running redundant systems? Do you have a backup? I mean, these are kind of the fundamental questions, but if you look at it end to end, a good security strategy is heavily dependent on IT.
Yeah, that was a great explanation. Hadar, coming back to the attack disruption, is there anything, any way on that you would like to see how customers can improve that disruption, can maybe improve the confidence, or can even contribute to that decision process?
So actually, first, if you don't mind,
Go ahead.
I just want to jump on like the previous topic, because I think like just to kind of connect it maybe to the SOC world and the security. I think one of the challenges is that these worlds today are not necessarily connected in every company, right? There's like the people that take care of like the IT and the way things are configured, and then 100%. There are the people that protect. And when these two groups don't talk, then we have a problem. And that problem goes all the way, because this is a circle, right? Like, yes, if you are misconfigured, you're more likely to be compromised. But then once you're compromised, how can you make sure that the learning from this attack you just experienced are going all the way back to your IT team, improving the configuration, making sure this incident won't happen in the exact same way tomorrow? So the connection between the worlds is actually what we see as a big challenge today, and we're trying to really connect the dots along with posture management in the unified platform, in Sentinel, in Defender. So that's just kind of close the loop.
I fully agree. I mean, this concept of continuous improvement, how can you improve if not everybody's working together? So absolutely. I think we do have an opportunity here through technology to kind of empower that, right? Copilot? But I don't want to rat hole too much. I do think there's a great opportunity.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And back to the disruption question. So we really see, like, I think first and foremost, and we stand behind it, like protecting customers is our responsibility, right? And when we look on disruption is a completely out-of-the-box capability. Like, it's on by default, and we just try to do our best and protect customers from any threat out there. And this is our mission, and we're taking it really super seriously. Now, of course, in order to be to give us the ability to protect customers, we need to have visibility into the data, right? So obviously we need to have all the sensors in place and sending data. So that goes back to posture concepts and how well do customers are configured and how can we help them. And I can give an example, right? Like in Sentinel, we have Optimize. And this is really a capability that is there to tell our customers, look, this is a threat and it's out there. And in order to be protected from this specific threat, and it can be ransomware, it can be financial fraud, or any other example that we have, you need to have this and that set of data connected into the system. So the visibility that we will gain enable us to protect you from it. And this is an in-product capability meant to guide our customers exactly for that question, like what do we need to do to enable disruption and to enable us to protect them better.
Okay.
Any other things? Because
I have so many questions I can ask on TI, but let me ask one question. I don't know if you feel comfortable to answer, but both of you being more on the endpoint side, or at least coming from the endpoint side of the house.
Hey, I'm not in the endpoint side for years now. So.
What's your take, or how impressed were you by the CrowdStrike outage?
Well, I'll say, I think no one should like seeing customers suffering and struggling.
100%, yeah.
Right, and we were set to see this. We did our best to help customers, right, to be back on their feet, back functioning. And this is the most important thing here, like the customer angle, to make sure that we help them gain back to healthy state. Obviously, things can happen. We need to do our best to make sure they don't happen, because we see how massive the impact can get, and we see how big our responsibility is on our customers' well-being. We take that very seriously, and we're learning and mostly trying to help, I think. Paul?
For sure. I think one of my key takeaways out of all of that is, let's do two. One, each and every person around me sprang into action to help customers. This was the best thing to witness, and it was universal. Two, you start to realize, I started to realize that we haven't seen an outage like this before. And so what are the conditions that create, what are the circumstances there that create the possibility for that to happen? You have to realize, we're talking about internet-connected machines at a scale that might be surprising. Well, obviously we all know that this is the case, but if you look at some of, let's go back in history, 2009, 2010, there were some massive outages. Also, concerning security vendors, and people started drawing the analogy. None of them were at this scale. None of them were this disruptive. Why? All of these connected systems. The internet's gone bigger. And on top of that, you start to see that many of the things we take for granted out there are at one point mission critical. If you can't check in for your flight, you have an issue. And so even if you can't pay for your Snickers bar at the supermarket, it's less of an issue. But right,
it depends on how much of a drama queen you are, right?
I know. But the point is, this is, I think, the bigger wake-up call here is it's not just, hey, as a security industry, we might want to re-examine how we do security, how we make sure availability is constant, top of mind, how we make sure quality is always there, how we work together as vendors. All of these are relevant things, but the thing that I actually was most concerned about by the fact that so many of these systems were critical when they went down. And so that's why I put an emphasis on, well, guess what? You are in control, at least for some of it. These are your machines. What's your plan? And guess what a good idea is to have as a ransomware mitigation strategy. And so these concepts they are almost circular in nature, where IT always has to think about continuity. And I think security should be involved in that conversation.
And maybe in the emergency plan where everybody is really believing that at the point of a real emergency, this is guiding you through the whole issue, right? So because that's something that I see many organizations are lacking.
No, for sure. And that's why I think this was a wake-up call probably for IT and security, both, right?
Yeah.
Hey, and I think that's where the real opportunity lies, is how can we do better? How can we make sure that we break those barriers, how we can let people collaborate, work on a common plan on, okay, what if disaster hits? What if I get ransomed? What if I have an outage? What's the plan? Because both of them are disruptions to the business. We all talk about BCDR. Who lives it? And so that's the part where I'm especially the audience here, very real role to play in being thought leaders in that area. It's okay, but have you thought about?
Yeah.
One of the things that we see when there's a security incident at a customer, budgets increase for a small period of time.
Yeah.
And so this is where we really need to work on that mentality of, hey, it should be continuity and security. It should be part of everything you do. What's your plan for that?
The learning curve should stay with us, right? If I take a totally different comparison and look on history, I think everybody worked in the security world remember WannaCry, right? Everybody remember WannaCry. Everybody learned a lot from WannaCry. Now, while this was a tragedy at the moment of happening, right? Today, we know we learned so much about it and we evolved based on that. So while not wishing for tragedies like that to happen, it is important that once it already happens, for us to learn exactly the things that Paul mentioned, and I think this is where we are focused on.
Brilliant. Thank you so much.
Let's end with that. I think that we learn from that kind of issues that happens if we continue that, because that kind of issues that will be there also in the next future, and if we learn from that, then we're good to go and we are prepared for the next one. Okay. So thanks for joining to be here on this event and helping us to delivering the message to all the attendees. Thanks for joining.
Great
Thanks for having us.
Thanks. Thank you.
And if you are listening to this episode or viewing this episode, please like and subscribe so you are knowing when the newest episodes are coming. So I say until then, thank you.
Thank you.